Nora was only 9 years old when she first saw him. The rain had been falling in sheets, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and green. The sky was heavy with clouds, the air thick with the scent of wet earth. She sat on the front porch of the little house with the white picket fence, watching the rivulets of water race each other down the sides of the old wooden steps, her knees hugged tightly to her chest. Her parents had gone out for a quick errand, and she was left alone with nothing but the dull hum of the storm. It was in the middle of this quiet isolation that she heard it, a soft whimper, almost lost in the rhythm of the rain. It was so faint, at first, that she thought it was a trick of the wind, the kind of sound that slips through the cracks of a heavy storm. But then it came again, louder this time, and filled with desperation. Her heart skipped a beat. She stood up, her small feet slipping a little on the wet porch as she looked around. It was hard to see much through the torrential rain, but the sound came from the side of the house, where the ivy and thick bushes grew wild, almost swallowing the wall itself. Without thinking, Nora rushed down the steps, her bare feet slapping against the wet ground. She pushed her way through the wet branches, squinting her eyes in the downpour, trying to find the source of the cry. There, huddled under the dense green leaves, was a small puppy shivering uncontrollably, his fur a tangled mess of wetness and dirt. His eyes were wide and frightened, a deep amber that seemed to stare straight through Nora, pleading for help without words. He was so small, barely a few months old, and his little body trembled as though the cold had consumed him entirely. Nora's heart broke in that moment, and without a second thought she knelt down beside him, her hands reaching out to gently coax him closer. He pulled back at first, his muscles tight with fear, but the instinct to find safety won out, and he slowly crawled toward her, his tiny body shaking violently. "It's okay, little guy," Nora whispered softly, trying to reassure him as she scooped him up into her arms. He was so light, like a fragile thing, barely more than a handful of fur and bones. "You're safe now." She didn't know where he had come from or how long he had been out there in the rain, but something deep inside her told her that he needed her, just as much as she needed him. She held him close, pressing him against her chest to warm him with her own heat. His fur was soaked through, and his little paws felt like ice, but she could feel him relax as the storm raged around them. She took slow steps back toward the house, her heart thumping in her chest, feeling a strange mix of excitement and fear. When she stepped onto the porch, she saw her mother's car pull into the driveway. Her parents were home. Nora's stomach dropped, and she felt an instinctual wave of anxiety rush over her. She had no idea what to tell them, but there was no way she could let this little creature go, not after everything she had just felt. "Nora?" Her mother's voice called out, sharp and curious. "What are you doing out here in this rain?" Nora froze, holding the puppy close, trying to keep him out of sight. She could see her mother's expression shift as she looked down at the small, shivering dog. She knew that look, that mixture of confusion, concern, and curiosity. He needs help," Nora said quietly, her voice thick with uncertainty. "I found him in the bushes. I don't think he has anywhere to go." Her mother's eyes softened, the initial shock fading into something more tender. "Where did you find him?" she asked, stepping closer. The puppy, now in the warmth of the house, seemed to calm, his trembling subsiding as he settled into Nora's arms. He raised his small head, his amber eyes staring up at her mother. Nora hesitated, unsure of how to explain that she had found the dog alone in the storm, with no collar or sign of a home. "I don't know. He was just there, under the bushes." Her mother's face turned thoughtful, then worried. "We can't just keep him, Nora. We need to find his owner. It's not safe for him to be out there." But Nora wasn't listening. The bond had already formed, something unspoken between them. She stroked the puppy's soft, damp fur, looking down at him with a fierce protectiveness that she hadn't known she was capable of. "Can we keep him, Mom? Just for a little while?" Nora's voice was almost a plea, her eyes wide with that desperate, familiar feeling that only a child knows when they want something so badly it hurts. Please, he's just a baby. Look at him. He needs us. Her mother sighed, her expression softening as she gazed down at the tiny dog, the concern slowly melting into affection. Well, we'll have to check with the vet and make sure he's okay, but I suppose for now, we can take care of him. We can put up flyers to see if anyone's looking for him. Nora's heart swelled with joy. The moment her mother agreed, it felt as though the puppy was already a part of their family. She carefully set him down in a blanket, watching as he curled into a ball and closed his eyes. He was exhausted, too tired to even protest. Nora knew this was just the beginning of something special, something she hadn't even begun to understand yet. Her mother smiled, brushing some stray wet strands of hair from her face. I think we'll have to name him. Nora's eyes lit up, her face bright with excitement. She thought for a moment, the name popping into her head as if it had always been there. How about Max? She suggested, her voice full of determination. Max? Her mother raised an eyebrow but smiled. I suppose it suits him. From that moment on, Max became part of their family. He was there for every moment of Nora's childhood, growing with her, sharing every joy, every tear. He was more than just a dog. He was her friend, her confidant, and the one who had been by her side through it all. And that stormy night, when the world had seemed so lonely, had marked the beginning of their unbreakable bond. The days turned into months, and the months into years. Nora and Max had grown together, each a reflection of the other. Where Nora was quiet and thoughtful, Max was exuberant and loyal. He seemed to mirror the moods of the world around them, always sensing when something was off. When Nora had her first day of school, it was Max who lay by the door, staring out at the street as if willing her to come home. When she returned, he greeted her with wild, jubilant tail wags, as if nothing in the world mattered more than her arrival. By the time she was 12, Max had already become a fixture in her life. He wasn't just a pet, he was family. He sat with her during late-night study sessions, curled up beside her as she read books, his warm body a constant comfort. On weekends, they spent hours outside, Max chasing after sticks, running so fast that his feet barely seemed to touch the ground. Nora would laugh, delighted by his boundless energy, while Max would bark and nudge her for another throw. Her parents, though supportive and loving, often seemed to disappear in the background. They were busy with work, often gone during the day, and Nora found that she relied on Max more and more. He didn't judge her. He just listened. When she cried after her first big fight with a friend, it was Max who licked the tears from her face, his gentle, comforting presence helping to soothe her. When she came home with an award or received a compliment at school, it was Max who seemed the happiest, wagging his tail and jumping around as though he understood every word. Through adolescence, Max became her confidant. He was there during the awkward moments of growing up, when she was unsure of herself and self-conscious about everything. Max didn't care. To him, she was perfect, just as she was. His love was unconditional, pure, and simple. It was the kind of love she could count on, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return. As Nora entered high school, life began to change. Friends came and went, and the pressure to be something she wasn't seemed to grow heavier with each passing year. Boys were no longer just something to talk about with friends. They became the subject of secret daydreams and unanswered texts. Nora began to feel like she was constantly balancing between being a child and becoming an adult. And somewhere, along the way, she realized she was starting to pull away from everything, retreating into herself. But there was always one constant: Max. The years passed quickly. Nora worked hard in school, keeping her grades up and excelling in her extracurriculars. She made new friends, lost some old ones, and started to dream about the future: college, a career, a life far away from the small town she had known her entire life. But Max was always there. He greeted her at the door every day, no matter how late she came home or how busy her life became. His enthusiasm never waned, and it was his joyful barks that grounded her, reminding her that some things never changed. By the time she reached her senior year, Max was no longer the young, hyperactive puppy he had once been. His steps were slower now, and there was a slight gray around his muzzle. His once pristine coat had begun to thin, and sometimes, when Nora took him out for a walk, he would stop and rest, panting more heavily than usual. It was subtle at first, the signs of age creeping in, but they were there. Nora noticed them, of course, but she refused to acknowledge them, not wanting to face the reality that Max, the one constant in her life, was growing older. One particular evening, just as Nora was preparing for her final exams, she found herself sitting on the couch, books spread out around her while Max lay at her feet. It was late, and the house was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Nora paused, looking down at him. His eyes, though tired, still sparkled with recognition and affection. She bent down and scratched behind his ears, smiling at the way his tail gave a slow, contented thump against the floor. "You're getting old, aren't you, Max?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words hit her harder than she expected, a lump forming in her throat. It was one thing to think about losing Max in the abstract, but it was something else entirely to face it in the present. Max gave a soft sigh, his tail flicking lazily behind him as if to say, "Don't worry, kid, I'm not going anywhere yet." Nora laughed quietly, trying to push the sadness away. She had a future to focus on, college, her dreams, the life she was about to step into. But even as her heart raced with excitement for what was to come, a part of her knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The next morning, when she woke up, she found herself staring at Max as he lay beside her bed. The pale morning light streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. For a moment, she just watched him, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath, the soft snores escaping his nose. And then, just as quickly, the thought struck her. He's getting older, and I'm getting ready to leave. Nora wasn't ready to leave Max. She wasn't ready to leave her home, her childhood, the little town that had shaped her into the person she was. But life was moving forward, and she couldn't stop it. The weight of that truth seemed to settle heavily on her chest, and she had to fight to keep the tears at bay. That afternoon, when her parents arrived home, she found herself quietly sitting with them, watching as they discussed the usual adult things: work, bills, plans for the future. They spoke in a way that felt both distant and comforting, their voices steady and familiar. Yet, Nora's mind kept drifting back to Max. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away faster than she could grasp. Her mom caught her staring into space and gave her a questioning look. "What's wrong, sweetheart? You seem a little lost today." Nora swallowed hard, trying to find her words. "I was just thinking about Max, and how much he's changed." Her mom smiled softly, understanding the sentiment. "Dogs grow old, sweetheart. They're with us for a little while, and we're lucky for that. But they can't stay forever." The words hit her with the force of a brick, but her mother's gentle touch on her arm grounded her. Max might not be forever, but in this moment, he was. And that, Nora decided, was something to hold on to. She glanced down at Max, still curled, up at her feet. He looked up at her with those same trusting eyes, and Nora felt a sense of peace. No matter what the future held, they still had now. And that was enough. The first sign came in the form of a limp. Nora had been used to Max's boundless energy, his quick, sure steps, his gleaming eyes as he raced around the yard, always chasing after something invisible, as if the world was one giant game of fetch. But that morning, as they went out for their usual walk, Max didn't bound ahead like he usually did. Instead, He slowed his pace, his ears drooping slightly. Nora frowned, watching him as he took one tentative step after another. "You okay, buddy?" she asked softly, crouching down to his level. Max gave her a tired, slow glance, his tail giving a feeble wag in response. But there was something in the way he moved. His left back leg lifted slightly after every step, as if it were too sore to touch the ground fully. "Come on," she encouraged, holding her hand out to him. "Let's take it slow today." Max did his best to keep up with her, but the limp was undeniable. By the time they reached the end of the street, he had slowed to a near stop, his chest heaving more than usual. Nora rubbed the back of his neck, gently, urging him to rest. "We'll turn around, Max. No need to push yourself." When they got back to the house, Nora carefully checked his paws, assuming maybe something sharp had gotten lodged in his foot, but they were clean. His coat still gleamed with the luster of his youth. It was his movements that had changed, and it was then that Nora understood. She had known, deep down, that time was beginning to catch up with him. She spent the next few days watching him closely, and the signs only became more apparent. His energy had always been infectious, but now there were moments when he just lay there, eyes half-lidded, barely lifting his head when she spoke to him. He slept more than he used to, and when he did get up, he moved like an old man, slow, stiff, and hesitant. His once strong frame was now beginning to show the wear and tear of the years. At first, Nora brushed it off. "He's just getting older," she told herself, trying to dismiss the creeping fear that lodged itself in her chest. Max had been her constant companion through every phase of her life. He had been there through middle school, high school, and even her first taste of independence as she prepared for college. But now, in these quiet, unsettling moments, it felt like she was watching him unravel, bit by bit. The true weight of his decline came one rainy evening, about a week after the first sign of the limp. Nora had just returned home from work, the familiar click of the door opening feeling like the start of another long day, when she found Max lying on the rug in the living room, his breathing shallow and uneven. She froze in the doorway. Max never lay like that unless something was wrong. His head was resting on his paws, but his eyes, those once bright, eager eyes, seemed dull, as though he were lost somewhere far away. "Max?" she called gently, walking over to him. Her heart pounded, and a sharp sense of panic started to rise in her chest. She knelt beside him, her fingers gently brushing his fur. He lifted his head with effort, and she could feel the weight of the moment, the way his body seemed heavy, burdened by something she couldn't understand. He gave a soft sigh, a sound so quiet and forlorn it almost broke her. His eyes locked with hers, as if pleading for her to understand. She hugged him close, burying her face in his fur, her throat tight with the effort not to cry. "You've been so strong, Max," she whispered, her voice shaky. "You've always been so strong." That night, she stayed beside him, sitting on the floor and stroking his fur, trying to ease whatever discomfort he was feeling. She stayed up far past midnight, just watching him breathe, praying that whatever was wrong would pass. But it didn't. The next morning, Max was still lethargic, barely eating or drinking. His once eager appetite for food seemed to have vanished. Nora couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Something was wrong. She had to take him to the vet. The vet was a kind woman named Dr. Hale, who had seen Max since he was a puppy. She had always known Nora and Max as a pair, and it was evident that she understood how deep their bond ran. Dr. Hale examined Max thoroughly, checking his heart, his joints, and his reflexes. Max barely moved as she prodded his body, his eyes, only flicking to Nora for comfort. After a series of tests and a long, drawn-out silence, Dr. Hale sat down across from Nora, her face calm but serious. "Max is in the early stages of arthritis, Nora," she said gently. It's a common condition for older dogs, but it's affecting his mobility. His joints are stiffening and his muscles are weakening. That's why he's having trouble moving." Nora blinked back tears, the reality of the situation sinking in like a cold weight in her chest. "Is there anything we can do? Any treatments?" Dr. Hale gave a soft, understanding sigh. "We can try medication to manage the pain and make him more comfortable. There are also joint supplements that might help, and some lifestyle changes, like more short walks and less intense exercise, can help too. But Max is aging, Nora. It's a part of life, and while we can slow it down, we can't stop it." Nora nodded, though her heart felt like it had shattered into 1,000 pieces. She had known that this day would come eventually, but the finality of it, hearing the words spoken aloud, was crushing. She wasn't ready. She wasn't ready to lose him. As they left the vet's office, Nora carried Max to the car, his small body resting in her arms like a fragile bundle. He gave her a weary look, as if to say, "I'm not ready to leave you either." The drive home was long, the road seeming to stretch endlessly ahead of her. Nora's mind was spinning, unable to make sense of the new reality she was facing. She looked at Max, his head resting on her lap, and she made a promise, soft and quiet. "I'll take care of you, buddy. I'll make sure you're comfortable. You won't go through this alone." That night, as Nora sat beside him on the floor, she realized something. Max had always been there for her, when she was happy, sad, confused, or angry. He had given her so much love and comfort that she couldn't even imagine life without him. And now it was her turn to give back to him. She would stay by his side, no matter how hard it got, no matter how much it hurt. For all the years they had shared together, it was now her turn to carry him through this. Together, they would face the inevitable. But for now, she would cherish every moment they had left, no matter how small, and hold on to the memory of the little puppy who had once found her in the rain. It was the slow days that broke her, not the sudden violent moments that came with loss. Those were easier to prepare for, in a way. The quiet, incremental slip of time was what really cut deep. Max's decline wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was the subtle loss of his spirit that hurt the most. It was the way he no longer raced to the door when Nora came home from work, no longer bounded up the stairs with his usual excitement when it was time for their evening walk. It was the way he now looked at her. Those tired, eyes soft with the knowledge that he was simply slowing down. It started small, just a little reluctance to climb into the car for their usual trips to the park. Max had always loved the car rides, his head out the window, ears flapping in the wind. But now, when she opened the door to the yay back seat, he would hesitate, then gingerly step in as though the effort took more out of him than it used to. They were still going for their walks, but Max's pace had slowed to a shuffle. He would stop frequently, his head lifted as if trying to sniff something in the air, but unable to quite get the energy to continue. Nora would wait patiently beside him, her hand resting gently on his back, offering him all the time he needed. "We don't have to rush, Max. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Some days she would see him look up at her as they rested on the park bench, his tired eyes searching hers. "Are you okay?" he seemed to ask, and Nora, swallowing the lump in her throat, would reply in her softest voice, "I'm okay, buddy. Are you?" He would let out a quiet sigh, then lean into her, his fur thinning more than it had been a few months ago. Max had never been a small dog, but now he felt frail, almost fragile under her touch. There were also the moments of confusion, those troubling flashes when Max would stand up from his bed, unsure of where he was, or he would stare at the door, as if waiting for something he couldn't quite remember. She would guide him back to the couch, or gently remind him of the toy in his bed. He would blink, then settle down again, as though the spell had passed. These moments, though fleeting, were the hardest. Max, who had always been the rock in her life, now seemed to need her in a way he never had before. It was a warm, sun-dappled afternoon when the next change occurred. Max had been particularly quiet that morning, retreating to his favorite spot, on the rug in the living room. He had been napping a lot lately, but today, Nora noticed something different. He didn't even lift his head when she called his name. She crossed the room, kneeling beside him, her heart heavy as she stroked his soft, thinning fur. He blinked up at her, but there was something vacant in his gaze. He didn't seem entirely present. "Max?" Nora whispered, her voice trembling. "Max, are you okay?" He let out a soft whimper, a sound that caused Nora's stomach to twist with fear. This was more than just old age, she realized. It wasn't just arthritis anymore. It was something deeper, something beyond her control. Her mind raced as she helped him to his feet, the weak tremble of his legs alarming her. Max, usually so steady, struggled to maintain balance. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to take him to the vet again. The drive to Dr. Hale's office was the longest she had ever experienced. The warmth of the sun streaming through the windows seemed to make everything feel too bright, too loud, too alive. Max lay on the seat beside her, his head resting on her lap, and though he still gave her the occasional look, those tired, loving eyes, something inside her told her this might be it. This might be the moment that marked the beginning of the end. At the vet, Dr. Hale wasted no time in checking Max over. She ran a few blood tests, took his vitals, and observed him quietly for a few minutes. Max, as always, tolerated the examination with a quiet grace. He had always been a calm, gentle soul, never one to resist a doctor's touch. But even now, Nora could see the way his body had lost its vitality. The familiar spark of life that had once been so bright was dimming, and it left a hollow ache in her chest. After what felt like hours, Dr. Hale sat across from Nora, her face kind but serious. "Max's condition has worsened," she began, gently. "His arthritis is advanced now, and unfortunately, he's also showing signs of kidney failure. His organs are beginning to weaken, and that's why he's so lethargic and confused." Nora's heart sank, and her eyes welled up with tears. She had known, she had felt it deep inside her, that Max wasn't just old anymore. He was sick. But hearing the words spoken aloud made it real, and the weight of it pressed down on her chest. "Is there anything we can do?" Nora asked, her voice tight with emotion. Dr. Hale paused, her eyes filled with sympathy. "We can try to manage his pain, keep him comfortable as best we can. But at this stage, it's more about giving him quality of life than anything else. The choice is up to you, Nora. But I need you to understand that this time may be shorter than we'd hoped." The room seemed to close in around her, the words echoing in her mind, each one a reminder that time was running out. Shorter than we'd hoped. It felt like the world had stopped spinning for just a moment. Max, her constant companion, was fading. When Nora got home that evening, she sat with Max on the porch, just as she had so many years ago. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves in the trees. It was peaceful. And for the first time in what felt like ages, Max seemed to rest more easily. He wasn't struggling to breathe, his movements weren't labored, and for just a moment, he seemed content. The weight of the world, the pain in his body seemed to have lessened for a while. Nora rested her head against his, breathing in his familiar scent. "I'm not ready to let you go," she thought, her eyes closing as tears welled up once more. "I'm not ready, Max." But she knew deep down that she didn't have a choice. She had promised him when he was a puppy, trembling in the rain, that she would always take care of him, and she would keep that promise, even if it meant making the hardest decision of her life. That night, after they came inside, Nora sat on the couch with Max beside her, his head resting on her lap. She gently ran her fingers through his thinning, fur, her heart breaking with each stroke. Every moment with him was precious now, and though she didn't want to think about it, she knew that the time was coming when she would have to say goodbye. But not yet. Not tonight. For now, she simply held him, and he held her in return, and together they sat in the quiet, knowing that they had shared something rare, something beautiful. The final day came with the gentle rhythm of a quiet morning, the kind of day that felt too ordinary for the enormity of what was about to unfold. Nora woke up to find Max curled up at the foot of her bed, his body still, his breathing shallow. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting a soft glow over the room, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Max didn't stir when she rose. She knelt beside him, stroking his soft fur, feeling the weight of his fragile body under her touch. There was a certain stillness to him now, something more than just sleep. It was as if he had already made his peace with what was coming. She couldn't help but think about how much of herself had been wrapped up in him for all these years. Max had been her companion through every moment of her life, through every tear, every laugh, every heartbreak, every triumph. He was more than just a dog to her. He was her childhood, her constant, the one who had loved her without question, without judgment. And now, he was nearing the end of his journey. Her hand trembled as she gently ran it down his back. "I love you so much, Max," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. His eyes fluttered open slowly, and he looked up at her, the softness in his gaze unmistakable. His tail gave a weak but familiar thump against the floor. It wasn't the enthusiastic wag he used to give when she entered a room, but it was enough. He still knew her, still recognized her, still loved her. Nora leaned down, pressing her forehead to his. "I know, buddy. I know. You've always been there for me. I'll always be here for you." The decision had been made weeks ago, after that final visit to the vet. Dr. Hale had been kind, explaining that the time had come to think about Max's comfort and dignity. "We can't let him suffer," she had said. "Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for them is to help them go when they've had enough." But just because she knew it was the right choice didn't make it any easier. No matter how much she tried to prepare herself, she wasn't ready for the weight of the final goodbye. Max had lived a long, full life, filled with love and loyalty. He had given her so much, and now it was her turn to give back, to let him go in peace. Nora stood up and walked to the window, her gaze lingering on the backyard where Max had spent countless hours chasing sticks, rolling in the grass, and watching the world go by. A part of her wanted to run outside with him one last time, to relive those carefree days when they were both younger, when everything seemed possible. But time, as it always does, had changed everything. She returned. To Max, her heart heavy but resolute. She called her parents, letting them know what was happening, and they arrived just as the morning grew warmer, their faces filled with quiet understanding. They had always loved Max, too. He had been their dog, as much as he had been hers. The vet was coming at noon. It felt like the longest morning of her life. No matter how much Nora tried to prepare herself, there was nothing that could have eased the ache in her chest when the vet arrived. The woman, whose kindness had never faltered, gently led them to the backyard, where Max had always felt most at home. It was a place of comfort and peace, just like he had been to her. The sun was high in the sky and the birds were singing. Everything seemed so alive, so bright, while the pain inside her felt like it had pulled all the color from the world. Max lay on the soft grass, his body weak but still content to be by her side. His eyes closed again, the faintest of breaths, escaping him as he rested his head in her lap. Nora stroked his fur one last time, her tears falling freely, but she held him close, her voice barely a whisper. "It's okay, Max," she said, her words full of love and grief. "You can go now. You've been so brave. I'll be okay, but you don't have to fight anymore." The vet knelt beside them, explaining the process gently, her voice a soft murmur. Max had been sedated slightly to make the transition easier, but as the needle entered his vein, Nora could feel it, the quiet, final release. His body tensed for a moment, and then everything went still. Max's eyes opened one last time, and for a fleeting second, Nora thought she saw a spark of recognition, a final connection between them. And then with a soft sigh, he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Nora's hand was still on his body, and she could feel the warmth leaving him, the softness fading, until he was just gone. She couldn't believe it. She didn't want to believe it. Max was gone, but even in that overwhelming grief, she felt a sense of peace. Max had been ready. He had given her everything, his love, his loyalty, his devotion. And now, he had found rest. They buried him under the oak tree in the corner of the yard, the place where Max had spent so many peaceful afternoons. It was a simple ceremony, but it felt right. Her parents stood beside her, both offering quiet words of comfort, but Nora couldn't speak. She just stood there, her heart breaking, her eyes fixed on the small mound of earth where Max now rested. As they finished, Nora placed a small stone at the head of the grave. It was smooth and round, and on it, she had written one word: forever. Because Max would be forever in her heart, forever in the memories of the life they had shared. No matter where she went, no matter how far apart they would be, he would always be with her. The days after Max's death felt like a blur. It was as if time itself had lost its meaning. Everything felt hollow, and the house was too quiet. The absence of his paws clicking across the floor, the absence of his wagging tail when she came home, it was a silence that pressed into her chest, suffocating her with its weight. But as the weeks passed, the pain softened into something more bearable. She found herself smiling at the memories, remembering his goofy antics, his protective nature, his love for the simplest things. She thought about how, for all the times she had been lost, he had always been her guide. Max had taught her so much. How to love unconditionally, how to appreciate the small moments, how to trust without hesitation. He had been her constant, her protector, her joy. And as she moved forward into the future, college, new beginnings, new chapters, she knew that Max would be there, in the quiet places of her heart, in the memories that would never fade. He had shaped her into who she was, and no amount of time could ever change that. He was gone, but he had left a piece of himself in everything she did. And that, Nora realized, was how love lasts forever. As we reach the end of this emotional journey, the story of Max and Nora reminds us of the timeless bond between humans and their loyal companions. Their love, though tested by time, remains unbreakable, etched in every moment they shared. But now, it's your turn to be part of something special. Today, we invite you to take action, whether it's opening your heart to a new furry friend in need, supporting organizations that give animals the love and care they deserve, or simply cherishing the pets in your life a little more. Our journey with Max reminds us that life is fleeting, but love endures. By bidding today, you're helping to create a world where more animals find the care, love, and forever homes they deserve. Together, we can make sure that every tail wags with joy, every heart beats a little stronger, and every home feels complete. Join us in supporting the cause. Place your bids, give with your heart. Be part of a movement that ensures that no animal has to face their journey alone. Let's make a difference. One paw, one heart, one bid at a time. Thank you for your generosity. And remember, every act of kindness, no matter how small, echoes forever.